Welcome back to Kidney Week. ASN thanks Vera Therapeutics for support of this plenary session.
In 2024, ASN propelled kidney care forward with groundbreaking achievements, creating lasting impacts on the industry and millions affected by kidney disease. This isn't just progress, it's a transformation in kidney health. The launch of ASN Kidney Health Guidance redefines person-centered care, improving outcomes and reshaping the healthcare landscape. Through the Partnership for Responsible AI in Kidney Health, ASN harnesses cutting-edge technology to revolutionize patient care. ASN's advocacy for kidney patients' access to essential vaccines strengthens protections for vulnerable populations. Securing CDC recognition for chronic renal failure patients ensures they receive critical preventive care, setting a new standard for comprehensive health protections. The Transforming Kidney Health Research Initiative accelerates discoveries in diagnostics and therapies, bringing innovative solutions to the forefront. ASN is tackling workforce challenges in nephrology through the Kidney Care Workforce Solutions Initiative. At the 2024 ANNA Nephrology Nursing Summit, ASN co-facilitated a key session focusing on strengthening the U.S. dialysis care team. Additionally, ASN led a plenary discussion on workforce strategies with top medical organizations at the CMSS annual meeting. By ensuring every patient receives the care they need, ASN is securing the future of nephrology for generations to come. The Diagnostic Excellence eGFR Toolkit advances equity in healthcare, promoting race-neutral diagnostics and ensuring fair, accurate diagnoses for all patients. Through the Fostering Inclusivity in Dialysis Access program, ASN is shaping the future of nephrology by training and empowering the next generation of leaders. The Glomerular Diseases Collaborative is elevating the standard of care for complex conditions by closing gaps in care, training, and research. Advocacy for organ transplantation has secured significant funding increases, expanding access to life-saving procedures. By reshaping policies and ensuring equitable access, more patients are given the opportunity for a new beginning. The Health Policy Scholar in Residence program shapes kidney care policy at the highest levels of government, aligning legislation with the needs of those living with kidney diseases. ASN is making a profound impact on the future of healthcare. ASN's unified editorial structure for its journals ensures groundbreaking research reaches a global audience. The Kidney Innovation Conference brought together industry leaders to tackle ethical, legal, and equity issues, laying the groundwork for innovations that will shape the future. Kidney Week 2024 is more than just an annual meeting. It is the largest global platform, sharing the latest research and clinical trials, and driving the industry forward. The knowledge and connections made here will inspire and fuel advancements in kidney care. ASN's accomplishments in 2024 are more than milestones. They are catalysts for change. And this is only the beginning of what's to come next.
Please welcome ASN past president and award selection committee chair, Dr. Michelle Josephson.
Good morning. I am pleased to present this morning's Lifetime Achievement Awards. First up, established in 2006, the Robert Narins Award honors individuals who have made substantial and meritorious contributions in education and teaching.
Teaching is an integral part of what an academic physician does.
Bob Narins has left a long list of legacies for the ASN.
Bob was creative and visionary and thought out of the box.
The reason why an education award should be given by the society is because it's one of its core missions.
Anybody can stand up and teach, but it's a certain talent that certain people have that get it across in a more digestible, more exciting, more animated way.
You have to love teaching. That's sort of a given. You have to really know the field, and you have to be able to explain it in a way that people can understand.
Bob Narins early on understood and had a vision to bring to the nephrologist the utmost and integrated knowledge from basic science to clinical care.
He brought fluid and electrolyte teaching into the mainstream so that there were all kinds of people, myself included, who followed after him, who might not have been able to do it if he hadn't set the path.
Bob Narins came on as the head of education, and he had a lot of really good ideas, and he was very aggressive.
He certainly will be remembered for the board review course, renal weekends, and NEFSAP.
I took a larger view of what was necessary to develop education to its greatest extent.
With this award, the American Society of Nephrology is recognizing the contributions of worthy individuals to teaching and education.
I thank you all.
Bob put education on the map at ASN.
His legacy lives on.
The American Society of Nephrology presents the 2024 Robert G. Narins Award to Dr. Scott Gilbert for his exceptional leadership and innovation in nephrology education and training. He is a distinguished professor of medicine at Tufts University School of Medicine and fellowship director in the Division of Nephrology at Tufts Medical Center. A graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Gilbert received his medical degree from Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis and trained in internal medicine and nephrology at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. He began his teaching career at Tufts University in 2001. Upon his arrival at Tufts, Dr. Gilbert assumed directorship of all undergraduate and postgraduate nephrology education and leadership of the Nephrology Fellowship Program at Tufts Medical Center. He has led the preclinical renal course at the school for more than 20 years and has contributed to numerous other courses and programs at TUSM. His effectiveness as an educator, leader, and innovator has been recognized with 47 teaching awards from Tufts, among many other honors. In 2006, Dr. Gilbert was named Education Editor of the American Journal of Kidney Diseases. Over the next 10 years, he developed, relaunched, or overhauled several key educational features, including the core curriculum in nephrology, the online educational forum EAJKD, and the annual Neph Madness contest. He has also served as editor of the National Kidney Foundation's Primer on Kidney Diseases, which has guided early professionals worldwide. Dr. Gilbert has made an even greater impact on nephrology through his work at ASN as a member of the Training Program Directors Executive Committee. As a member of the committee and then chair of the ASN Workforce and Training Committee, he has left an indelible mark on postgraduate training and the development of the nephrology workforce. He was program chair for several TPD retreats and virtual town halls. In exploring important topics such as the subspecialization of nephrology, the role of procedures in nephrology, the declining interest in nephrology among students and house staff, diversity and racism in nephrology, and expanding the nephrology workforce through outreach to DOs and incorporation of physician extenders, Dr. Gilbert has shown to be an important leader in moving nephrology forward. Most recently, Dr. Gilbert has directed his efforts toward mentoring and diversification of the nephrology and medical workforces. He has spearheaded and participated in several initiatives for underrepresented and disadvantaged students, including the Summer Clinical Immersion Program at Tufts. With the support of his wife Lisa and his 3 sons, Jesse, Zach, and Noah, Dr. Scott Gilbert has consistently proven to be a highly effective educator, advocate, and leader in the nephrology community.
Please join me in welcoming this year's Narins Award recipient, Dr. Scott Gilbert.
Wow. I am deeply humbled by this recognition. This is the Narins Award, named after Bob Narins, who codified nephrology education and is the godfather of nephrology educators. Bud Rose won this award, my attending throughout residency and fellowship. Many of my mentors, Mark Rosenberg, Don Cohan, Nancy Day Adams at the Workforce and Training Committee, have been recognized. And many of my esteemed collaborators, Mark Parazella, Joel Toff, Agnes Fogo, Mitch Rosner, have also been found deserving. I want to thank my nominators, the award selection committee, and most importantly, the ASN, who have recognized, valued, and promoted the work of educators in establishing this award. I consider myself to be an accidental nephrologist. I come from a family of physicians. My grandfather practiced family medicine, my father was a radiation oncologist, and my uncle introduced me to kidney medicine as a urologist. But I aspired to be a physician with deep and close connections to my patients, compassionately caring for them over many years and through many challenges, and sought a career in primary care. However, mentors like Ted Steinman, Bob Brown, and Lloyd Cantley first introduced me to the compassion of the nephrologist, their deep and long-lasting relationships with their patients, and the fascinating and complex needs of this population. It was obvious where I needed to be. I'm also an accidental educator. Despite my mother being a teacher, I did not grow up wanting to be an educator. But it didn't take me long to realize that the fulfillment of connecting with learners matched the satisfaction I got from caring for patients. This connection with learners was modeled by those who have developed my career. Have you ever talked to Melanie Honig and seen how she draws you in immediately, keeps you riveted, and inspires you with unbridled enthusiasm? Andy Levy, who hired me directly out of fellowship to run the Tufts Nephrology Fellowship Program and lead the Tufts Medical School renal course, continued to see things in me I could not have imagined and encouraged me with incredible opportunities. And Amy Kulik, who was my attending during residency and fellowship before becoming my dean at Tufts, has supported my successful and sometimes less successful innovations. I am a product of my mentors. They are the guides who explored my interests and how they could be achieved. They encouraged me to apply my skills and to the tasks I found most meaningful. And they made me who I am and have contributed to what I have accomplished. Educators are shepherds. We're not merely content experts. There are abundant resources like UpToDate, YouTube, podcasts, TikTok for that. Educators go further by making nephrology available, accessible, and actionable to learners. We impact the next generation by sharing our passion and demonstrating our enthusiasm and guiding our students and trainees as they process their experiences. There is a role for all of us as educators, connecting with learners, developing their interests, and guiding their professional journeys. After the Narins Award was announced, I've been overwhelmed by the acknowledgments of my students, mentors, and colleagues. I only hope I have impacted their careers, much like my mentors have influenced me. My work could not have been possible without the support of my home institution, Tufts, and the organizations that have provided me opportunities, the ASN and the National Kidney Foundation. At Tufts, Mark Sarnak and Andy Levy encouraged me to try new things. Dan Weiner has been my partner at AJKD on the primer of kidney diseases and in multiple pipeline projects. Seth Wright, Craig Gordon, Tamor Dodd, Leslie Inker, and my other colleagues have supported me, role modeled effective care, and contributed to our teaching, training, and mentoring efforts. I wish my grandfather, Dr. Morris Gilbert, was here. He was that family medicine doctor who cared for the disenfranchised immigrants as they arrived off the ships in Brooklyn, New York. I'd like to recognize my father, Dr. Stuart Gilbert, who as a radiation oncologist in Portland, Maine, showed me how critical the doctor-patient relationship is as patients endure their greatest challenges. And my three boys, Jesse, Zach, and Noah, who I think were a bit perplexed and definitely disappointed when they realized I was a kidney doctor and not a doctor who cared for kids' knees. And finally, my wife, Lisa, without whose love and support I would not have the confidence and space to do what I love. Thank you very much.
Our next award is the John Peters Award. Established in 1983, this award recognizes individuals who have made substantial research contributions to nephrology and have sustained achievements in one or more domains of academic medicine, including clinical care, education, and leadership.
John Peters was clearly one of a kind.
He was groundbreaking.
He believed in progress, and he believed progress needed pushing.
John Peters really is considered sort of the father of modern nephrology. He really was instrumental in quantifying measurements of things like urine and blood.
His laboratory was the bedside. He did his research at the bedside trying to understand patients.
Dr. Peters really was a leader in using actual measurements in patients to uncover pathophysiology and to apply the advances in basic physiology to actually see how that could benefit patient care in the real world.
Quantitative Clinical Chemistry was a groundbreaking book. It forced everybody to think in theorems and then test these theorems by doing interesting experiments.
He was sort of an early translational scientist. I think Peters was ahead of his time, and I think he was a visionary.
Peters wanted to speed up the evolutionary process of medical progress through medical science and education with federal funding.
My grandfather had very strong values and felt it was very important that medical care be given to all Americans.
It's interesting to think about current debate and recent healthcare legislation in light of what Peters promoted and pushed for back in the 1930s.
Amidst all of his medical excellence, he was committed to healthcare.
It's this kind of breadth of concern for the health of the entire healthcare system that made John Peters unique and established the legacy for the wonderful recipients we've had for the John Peters Award.
The American Society of Nephrology presents the 2024 John P. Peters Award to Dr. Susan Quagan for her extensive research contributions and leadership in nephrology. She is the Irving S. Cutter Professor and Director of the Cardiovascular Research Institute at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine in Chicago. In 2023, she became the first woman chair of medicine at Feinberg. A Canadian native, Dr. Quagan earned her medical degree at the University of Toronto, where she developed a passion for nephrology research as a resident with Dr. Mitch Halperin at the university's St. Michael's Hospital, and later completed her nephrology fellowship. She also completed 2 postdoctoral fellowships, one in molecular biology of kidney development in the Igarashi lab at Yale, and another in mouse genetics with the Rossent lab at the University of Toronto. She held several faculty positions at U of T before joining Northwestern in 2013 as Chief of the Division of Nephrology and Director of the Feinberg Cardiovascular Research Institute, working with her mentor and dean, Dr. Eric Nielsen. Dr. Quagan's research interests include a focus on vascular signaling pathways. Her laboratory uses genome editing techniques and proteomic approaches to develop new treatments for kidney and vascular diseases. She and her lab were the first to report an essential role for vascular endothelial growth factor signaling and crosstalk and glomerular function in the kidney. Their groundbreaking results have been published in a number of widely cited papers. Translation of her group's findings have revealed pathogenic mechanisms and new therapeutic targets for several kidney diseases, including diabetic nephropathy, nephrotic syndromes, AKI, and thrombotic microangiopathies, as well as eye diseases such as glaucoma. Dr. Quaggan has held many leadership positions in the scientific and kidney communities. She has served ASN in numerous capacities, including president, associate and deputy editor for JASON, Kidney Week Program Committee Chair, and chair of the Kidney Cure Board of Directors. She was a counselor for the American Society for Clinical Investigation and currently serves as a counselor for the Association of American Physicians. Her leadership and research accomplishments have been recognized with awards and honors from the International Society of Nephrology, National Academy of Medicine, the National Academy of Inventors, the Institute of France, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, among others. On the home front, Dr. Quaggan is an avid runner and has participated in the Chicago Marathon. She and her husband Kevin enjoy quality time with their children Jessica, Patrick, and David, and their spouses John and Miranda, and their 2 dogs, Finn and Zoe. Like this award's namesake, Dr. John Peters, Dr. Susan Quaggan has worked tirelessly to advance the field of nephrology through her scientific work, clinical practice, and leadership.
Please join me in welcoming this year's Peters Award recipient, Dr. Susan Quaggan.
Wow, well, that's a little much to see up there on the screen, I have to say. And it truly is difficult for me to find the right words to express my gratitude. Of course, to the American Society of Nephrology, who truly are like a second family to me, and the awards selection committee, but more broadly to the entire kidney community. As I said last night, it seems really unfair to be recognized for having the privilege of getting up each and every day to do what you love to do, but that's what I've been able to do. I truly feel incredibly lucky to be part of this amazing kidney community. And for me, why was it nephrology? Why kidney? Well, that was actually pretty easy. The very first clinical rotation I had as an intern was on the nephrology service. Maybe that was serendipity. But I was introduced to incredible mentors, the physicians, the nurses, the nephrology fellows, the Dear 11. But most of all, it was the patients I met who inspired me then, so many decades ago now, but who continue to inspire me each and every day. I don't have time, I was given a real tight time limit, to mention everybody who has truly made my journey in nephrology the most rewarding. But I do want to call out a few specific individuals. The first, Mitch Halprin, who you saw there, who I met very early on as an intern, who taught me to always remain curious and always to never accept the published word, but to continue pushing to find better answers so we could impact patient care. To Peter Igarashi, who took me into his lab at Yale, a wet bench lab. I'd never picked up a pipette before, who taught me so much, and Peter, that was pretty courageous. To Janet Rassant, a stem cell pioneer who truly taught me the discipline of being a scientist. And last but certainly not least, to a very long-time friend and mentor, and who continues to guide me, provide advice, and keep me on the straight and narrow, Dean Eric Nielsen. Now, my husband just said, you better not mention me, but today I am going to give a shout out to my home team, who have put up with a lot and without whom I could do nothing. So to my much better half of 45 years this coming Halloween, Kev, to my 3 amazing children you saw up there, Jess, Patty, and Dave, whose first words probably were podocyte, and to their amazing spouses who are now part of our family, Miranda and John. And also, I've been incredibly fortunate really to have 2 sets of parents for most of my life. My own mom and dad, who never found any sacrifice too great to let me pursue my dreams, especially to my dad, who I lost very recently. He would have loved to have been here. And to my in-laws, Marl and Doc. So I want to thank you. Truly, this is the highest honor of my career to accept this John P. Peters Award, not on my own behalf, but on behalf of the entire kidney community, to my colleagues, the brilliant trainees, the many, many incredible staff at ASN and other organizations I've been privileged to work side by side with and learn from, and most of all, to the patients. So I'll close with a pledge that despite being advanced in age, I will continue to fight the good fight. And as President Deirdre Cruz rallied us yesterday, I will continue to work to redefine the standard until we all reach that vision, a world without kidney diseases. Thank you.
ASN and the Council on the Kidney and Cardiovascular Disease of the American Heart Association are proud to present the Donald Seldin Young Investigator Award. Dr. Seldin helped establish nephrology as a medical specialty and create ASN, serving as the Society's 2nd president.
Young investigators in kidney disease are definitely a hope for the future.
The young investigator often has a new approach.
Don Seldin was a master teacher and clinician.
He had tremendous impact on young investigators.
One of the major advantages to the whole community of the Young Investigator Award is to highlight new areas of science.
We believe that funding young investigators is the key to keeping the next generation of scientists bringing new treatments for both kidney disease and heart disease.
Dr. Seldin always encouraged young investigators to go after it with dedication and diligence. Give it everything you've got. He was a leader in academic nephrology, not only in research, but also in the practice of nephrology and education.
The Department of Medicine at Southwestern took giant steps forward because of Dr. Seldin. He helped many young investigators by directing them to the most logical set of experiments that would dig into the problem they were studying.
He paid a lot of attention to young investigators because he realizes they are the future.
Young investigators are actually making new discoveries that will help everyone, not only in nephrology, but in all fields of research.
Research is at a really exciting time. We know more, we have more technology than we ever had before. So the potential to impact human disease is great.
I think it's appropriate for Dr. Seldin's name to be wedded to the Young Investigator Award. It bonds his name to those individuals who will carry science forward into a new era.
The 2024 Donald W. Seldin Young Investigator Award, co-sponsored by the American Society of Nephrology and the American Heart Association's Council on the Kidney and Cardiovascular Disease, is presented to Professor Hitto Giersbank for his productive and creative contributions in kidney-related research and teaching. He is a professor in the Department of Clinical Pharmacy and Pharmacology at the University Medical Center Groningen in the Netherlands. He is also a co-joint professor at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. Professor Hirspink studied pharmaceutical science at the University of Groningen and earned his PhD from the University Medical Center Groningen. After training at the George Institute in Sydney in 2008, he learned that his first publication was accepted in The Lancet. In 2012, he was appointed to UMCG's faculty and advanced through the ranks to full professor within 5 years. The primary focus of Professor Hirspink's research is optimizing current treatment strategies and finding new therapeutic approaches to halt the progression of kidney and cardiovascular diseases in patients with diabetes, with a specific focus on personalized medicine. He has led many clinical trials with novel interventions to reduce diabetes-related kidney and cardiovascular complications, and has collaborated with leading investigators from around the world. His innovations in trial design and statistical analysis have informed and enhanced clinical practice. Professor Hirspink's work has expanded into cardiovascular and metabolic disease, in keeping with the AHA's recently launched CKM Health Initiative. Among his most notable contributions are his participation in the CKD Prognosis Consortium, his role in highlighting the importance of albuminuria in CKD progression, his development of novel disease detection methods, and his leadership of some of the most influential clinical trials in nephrology. Professor Hirspink has authored or co-authored more than 500 peer-reviewed publications and is an editorial board member of Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism and CJASN. He has served on several international conference committees, including the European Association for the Study of Diabetes, and has given more than 200 invited lectures. Through his teaching, mentorship, and supervision of PhD students and postdoctoral fellows, he has increased the pool of scientists engaged in kidney-related research across the globe. The recipient of several distinguished awards from the EASD, Harvard, and the Japan Diabetes Society, among others, Professor Hiddo Lambers Hirspink has established himself as one of the leading clinical scientists and educators in nephrology.
Please join me in welcoming this year's Young Investigator Award, Dr. Hiddo Hirspink, who will present on innovations in clinical trial design and conduct for new therapeutic approaches in CKD.
Wow, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. What a great morning for me. And I'd like to thank the ASN, the American Heart Association, the Kidney Week organizers for giving me the opportunity to deliver the Donald Seldin Award lecture this morning. I'm deeply honored to receive this award. And it is my pleasure to deliver this talk about new innovations in clinical trial design and conduct in order to advance the discovery of new treatments for patients with chronic kidney disease. My disclosures are listed on this slide. Because indeed we have made great progress in the last couple of years with the discovery of new treatments for patients with CKD. It started 5 years ago with the SGLT2 inhibitor canagliflozin, as shown here on the top left. The Kaplan-Meier curve demonstrated that for the first time an SGLT2 inhibitor on top of ACE inhibitors and or angiotensin receptor blockers can reduce the risk of kidney disease progression. A year later, finerenone, a non-steroidal mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, demonstrated kidney and cardio protection. And then endothelin receptor antagonists can also reduce the risk of kidney outcomes and slow the progression of kidney function decline in patients with IgA nephropathy. And most recently, the FLOW trial demonstrated that the GLP-1 receptor agonist semaglutide reduced risk of kidney failure and cardiovascular endpoints in patients with diabetic kidney disease. So we have 4 new drug classes that can protect the kidney. And now you could argue that we have solved the problem of chronic kidney disease, we have cured chronic kidney disease. Well, I don't think that's completely true. I still believe that there is residual risk and that we have to innovate our trials, innovate the therapies to further reduce CKD progression. And I will explain this with an example from the DAPA-CKD trial, the trial with dapagliflozin in patients with chronic kidney disease. The trial demonstrated that dapagliflozin reduced the risk of kidney failure by 39% and reduced albuminuria by about 30%, as you can see in the graph on the left. On the right here, you can see the distribution of baseline albuminuria values in the 2,000 patients that were treated with dapagliflozin, the solid blue bars. And then when you look after 4 months of treatment with dapagliflozin, you can see that there are more patients in the lowest albuminuria category. So the distribution has shifted to the left. But what you can also see is that there are still more than 650 patients while being treated with dapagliflozin that still have an albuminuria level of more than 1,000 milligram per gram creatinine. And these patients, despite being treated with dapagliflozin, are still at risk of CKD progression. And that's illustrated here in this graph. If we look at the distribution and we take those patients with an albuminuria of 1,000 milligram per gram, you can see that the risk of those patients is identical to the patients that were treated with placebo. So while you are receiving the treatment, if you have still high albuminuria, you are still at a similar risk as a placebo-treated patient. The only difference was that the dapagliflozin-treated patients came from a higher level. They came from a level of 1,500 milligram per gram. The albuminuria was reduced to 1,000 milligram per gram, but at that level, the risk was the same as the placebo-treated patients. So this suggests that we have to further reduce albuminuria in order to further reduce the risk of kidney disease progression or cardiovascular disease. So we have to think about how can we then optimize all these new drugs, and should we think about combination treatments? And then if we think about combination treatments, which combination for which patient? A couple of years ago, we already started to think about this. And we did a study in patients with chronic kidney disease that were treated with dapagliflozin or the MRA eplerenone. When we started the study, finerenone was not available, so we had to choose another MRA and we chose eplerenone. This was a crossover study. And as you can see here, dapagliflozin reduced albuminuria by about 19% on the left. And then if you stop dapagliflozin, you can see that in the washout period, the albuminuria levels return to baseline. Eplerenone reduced albuminuria by 34%. And then if you stop the drug, the albuminuria levels return to baseline. 19 plus 34 is 53%. And indeed, the combination reduced albuminuria by 53%, an additive effect of the two drugs together. If you stop the drug, the albuminuria levels return to baseline. We know that SGLT2 inhibitors reduce the risk of hyperkalemia. And interestingly, in this study, we found indeed that eplerenone, as expected, increased the risk of hyperkalemia. There were more patients with hyperkalemia. But if you look at the combination, you see fewer patients with hyperkalemia. And a similar signal is seen for potassium levels. There is indeed more patients with potassium levels greater than 5, but fewer in the combination. So here we have a combination treatment that has additive effects in terms of efficacy and less side effects. A similar pattern is seen with another combination. This is a study that we presented last year here at Kidney Week. In this study, we combined an endothelin receptor antagonist, zibotentan, together with an SGLT2 inhibitor, dapagliflozin. And the combination indeed reduced albuminuria by about 60%, and that was significantly more than dapagliflozin alone. So with this combination, you get more efficacy. We know that SGLT2 inhibitors have diuretic effects. And on the other hand, we know that endothelin receptor antagonists can cause fluid retention, which can lead to edema and possibly even heart failure. So can we now combine an endothelin receptor antagonist together with an SGLT2 inhibitor to mitigate and attenuate the risk of fluid retention? Well, indeed, that seems to be true from this study, because in this study we measured total body water, extracellular volume with bioimpedance spectroscopy, and with the low-dose sibutenten in combination with dapagliflozin, the blue line, you see hardly any fluid retention anymore. So maybe in the future we should combine an endothelin receptor antagonist with an SGLT2 inhibitor to enhance the protection and mitigate the side effect of an endothelin receptor antagonist. But as I said, which combination should we use for which patient? This was a study that we conducted in 63 patients with type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And this again was a rotation study. So every patient was treated with telmisartan, empagliflozin, and then linagliptin, the DPP-4 inhibitor, and then baricitinib, the JAK-STAT anti-inflammatory drug. And it seems that every patient has a preferred drug. 33 patients responded in terms of albuminuria reduction to telmisartan, but they did not respond to any of the other 3 drugs. There were patients who responded to empagliflozin, but they did not respond to the other drugs and modestly to telmisartan. And the same was true for linagliptin or baricitinib. So maybe we have to tailor the medication or the combination of treatments to the right patient. But to do that, we have to innovate our clinical trial designs. And we have to find new study designs to tailor those medications and individualize the treatments. But we also need new biomarkers to identify people at risk of progression for our future trials. We have to use new digital tools to conduct clinical trials at home. We have to think about decentralized clinical trials. And we have to think about new methods and endpoints to assess long-term drug effects. And I would like to touch upon these 4 elements in the next couple of minutes. There are various types of study designs that you can use to study personalized medicine. The NS1 trial is one type of a design where individual patients are treated multiple times with the drug and placebo, and I will give you an example of such a study design. We can also use biomarker stratified designs, where we first identify patients based on a biomarker profile. And then the positive biomarker patients are randomized to active medication or placebo, and the negative biomarker patients are randomized to active medication or a control. And then we assess the treatment effect in the biomarker positive and negative subgroups. But we have other more recent trial designs that we can use as well. Basket and umbrella trials. A basket trial is an infrastructure to test multiple diseases with a single agent. And we do such a basket trial already in nephrology. This is the affinity basket. It's a basket trial where we test one drug, in this case an endothelin receptor antagonist atrasentan, in patients with diabetic kidney disease, IgA nephropathy, FSGS, or Alport syndrome. So different types of kidney disease receive the same medication. But there are also umbrella trials, which gives you an infrastructure to test the same disease, but participants with different molecular phenotypes are treated with different interventions. And the Neptune Match umbrella trial is one example in nephrology. A single disease, these are FSGS patients, are then molecularly phenotyped and based on their phenotype receive different interventions. And then finally, we can think about platform trials. These are multiple interventions, including this platform trial allows assessment of multiple interventions, including interactions between individual interventions or combination treatments in a single disease, like kidney disease. It provides a standing trial infrastructure with no fixed end date. A core protocol defines key design elements, and one can add new interventions while the core protocol is ongoing. It's an ineffective agents can be removed based on accumulating data during the conduct of a platform. We are conducting such a platform trial in nephrology already. And this is the Captivate platform. And the design of the Captivate platform will be published in the next few weeks in JAMA Network Open. It has a core protocol and different domain-specific appendices where we test different interventions. The first domain will test finerenone versus placebo on top of SGLT2 inhibition and ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers. The second and third domain are currently in the startup phase. And the beauty is that you can now assess patients who participate in the first domain can also participate in the second or third domain, which allows you to test interactions between different interventions that are tested in these different domains. Now, what about new biomarkers and biomarker panels? I believe that we should also use them in our future clinical trials. In our current trials, we always enrich the population based on high albuminuria. And the reason is that these patients are at higher risk of progression towards the endpoint, a late manifestation of kidney disease, namely dialysis or kidney transplantation. And this example from the CANVAS trial, which tested the effect of canagliflozin, shows indeed that those patients with high albuminuria have the highest kidney event rate. But if we look at the total number of events, actually the patients with normal or microalbuminuria show a similar number of events. So the question is, can we identify these patients, these 89 patients with normal albuminuria, with new biomarkers in order to enroll them in our future clinical trials? A machine learning model has been developed which includes routinely collected laboratory data, including urea, hemoglobin, blood cell counts. And that is a new model that predicts disease progression. If we compare this ClinRisk model with eGFR and albuminuria, you can see that the predictive performance, the area under the RC curve, is higher compared to our standard biomarkers to enrich clinical trials. Now, if we apply that to the CANVAS trial, we see here on the right that indeed those patients with high albuminuria in the ACE3A category have a higher event rate and more patients reach the endpoint compared to normal albuminuria. But as soon as we also use the ClinRisk score, we can see that the patients with normal albuminuria and a high ClinRisk score have a similar event rate compared to the patients with a high albuminuria. So maybe we can use this tool in our future trials to identify the patients with a high risk of CKD progression. We can also use new digital tools to conduct studies at home. And this is an example of an at-home trial. In this clinical trial, patients never visited the hospital. They collected all the data at home. They used blood pressure and body weight devices that was connected to their mobile phone, and the data was directly transported into a cloud-based data system. They collected almost every day blood and urine samples, which were sent by regular mail to a laboratory where the samples were analyzed and stored in the cloud. The investigators then analyzed the data and they reported the data. This was an NS1 trial. So patients were exposed 2 times to dapagliflozin, and these were patients with type 2 diabetes and microalbuminuria, and they were exposed twice to placebo treatment. Dapagliflozin, first and second exposure, reduced albuminuria. And you can see here the individual patient responses. It's quite consistent in the dapagliflozin group when you measure the first and the second time, but you can see here in the placebo group there's more variation during the first and second exposure when you look at individual patients. And indeed, when we correlate the first response to albuminuria with the second response to dapagliflozin, there is a nice correlation. So the patients who responded well the first time responded well the second time. You don't see such a correlation in the placebo group. And of course, this correlation is not perfect because we know that there is random fluctuation in albuminuria from day to day. There is measurement error. But despite that variation, we found this nice correlation, which suggests that we can monitor the treatment response at home. We also asked the patients how they experienced the at-home data collection. And if you look here at this 5-point Likert scale, you see that patients found it easy to collect urine at home and ship it to a laboratory. The patients also experienced no problems with connection of their mobile device to their mobile phone. Now in this next study, we tried to optimize the treatment. Again, decentralized at home. So in this study, we test now 2 drugs, an SGLT2 inhibitor, and then on top of that, finerenone. And we stratify and we make decisions based on the response to empagliflozin. So if a patient responds well to empagliflozin, but the residual albuminuria is too high, more than 30 milligrams per gram, we're going to add finerenone. If the patient does not respond to empagliflozin, so an increase in albuminuria, we switch the medication to finerenone. And these are the first patients that participate in this study. The first patient here showed a 20% reduction in albuminuria, the second 40%, and the third did not show a reduction in albuminuria. You can see here on the right the patients and the residual albuminuria, all above 30 milligrams per gram. So in these first 2 patients, we're going to add finerenone, and in this third patient, we switch the patient to finerenone. And this is the result. In the first patient, actually finerenone did not reduce albuminuria. In the second patient, indeed, when we monitored this at home, the patient responded and the albuminuria further reduced. And in the third patient, in whom we switched the patient, you see now a modest reduction in albuminuria, but still too high, above 30 milligrams per gram. We're going to continue this study, but this is an example how we can monitor the treatment response at home and how we can optimize medication for individual patients at home. And then finally, we can also think about new methods and endpoints to assess long-term drug effects in our future clinical trials. If we look at the big clinical trials that we have conducted in nephrology, more than thousands of patients participate in these clinical trials. Only about 10% during the duration of the trial reached the established clinical kidney endpoint of a doubling of creatinine, halving of kidney function, or end-stage kidney disease. These endpoints are composite endpoints, and we always look at the time to the first endpoint, which is often a decline in GFR. But the clinical relevant endpoint is dialysis or kidney transplantation. But in our clinical trials, we only look at the time to the first event, the time to GFR decline. In addition, many patients do not experience an endpoint. And in these clinical trials, the hazard ratio is determined by the number of patients who reach the endpoint. These are often the fast progressors in the trial, a selection of the patient. But ideally, we would like to assess the treatment effect in the overall population, in all patients. New developments in endpoints, mainly from the cardiology field, can now allow us to involve the data from all patients in the endpoint. Hierarchical composite endpoints analyzed with the win odds or win ratio approach allow us to prioritize the most relevant endpoint and then also use GFR slope in the endpoint for patients who do not experience a clinical endpoint. So how does that work? In contrast to taking the time to the first endpoint, we are going to prioritize the most relevant endpoint. In our case, dialysis. And we make pair of patients, an active patient and a control patient. And every time we compare the active with the control patient, and we compare if the patient reached dialysis. If the control patient reached dialysis, the treated patient is the winner. Vice versa, if the treated patient reached dialysis, the placebo-treated patient is the winner. If none of these patients, if both do not reach the dialysis endpoint, we move down one step in our hierarchy and compare end-stage kidney disease, a GFR below 15. And again, we're going to compare if the patient, active or control patient, reached this endpoint. So we get many comparisons because all active patients are compared with all placebo-treated patients. And then we have a set of winners in the placebo group, a set of winners in the active group, and we calculate the ratio, which is the win ratio or the win odds, the likelihood of being a winner compared to placebo. If we do that in all our big trials, you can see here on the left the original endpoint and the hazard ratio. And on the right, you see this win ratio or win odds, the likelihood of being a winner when you are assigned to active medication. And indeed, if the hazard ratio is reduced, you can see that the win odds is increased. So the direction and the magnitude of the effect is consistent. And now we can use this new method, the hierarchical composite endpoints, to our future trials. Where is this particularly relevant? For example, in trials where we do not see a lot of events, like in patients with FSGS. This is an example from the DAPA-CKD trial. There were few patients with FSGS participating in the trial. There was a tendency that the drug worked, a hazard ratio of 0.45, but the confidence interval crossed 1 because there were not so many endpoints. This eGFR slope also favored dapagliflozin in these patients, but because we did not have so many patients, the effect was not statistically significant. But now, with this new endpoint, we can combine the clinical events with the GFR slope. And if we do that, and if we calculate the win odds, when we use this approach, you can see the win odds is 1.7, statistically significant. Why do we find this statistical significant effect? Because this new endpoint provides us more statistical power to detect treatment effects. And you can see that here in this graph. For 225 patients, the statistical power for this new endpoint is higher compared to the composite traditional endpoint or to GFR slope. So a new innovation that we can use in our future trials. So my take-home message in this Donald Seldin lecture is that despite multiple new proven effective and safe therapies, the risk of kidney and cardiovascular disease remains high. Drug combinations are needed to further optimize pharmacotherapy and prognosis for patients with chronic kidney disease. These drug combinations have to be tailored to each patient, taking into account the heterogeneous molecular phenotypes. Prospectively tested in randomized controlled clinical trials like the NIS1, basket, umbrella or platform trials. And these trials can be done now at home using endpoints that prioritize clinical events and enable studies in smaller targeted populations. Decentralized at-home clinical trials conduct has great promise in my view for the future. Now, on that note, I would like to acknowledge and thank the American Society of Nephrology, the American Heart Association, to award me with the ASN-HA Donald Seldin Award. I am extremely honored and privileged to be the 2024 recipient. And I want to express my gratitude to the award selection committee, the Kidney Week organizers, and the ASN and the AHA. I believe that the recognition and the award I receive reflects the hard work and commitment of many people I have had the pleasure to collaborate with. Some of them are mentioned here on this slide, but for sure there are many, many others who have contributed to the work that I'm doing. I am incredibly lucky to have so many colleagues and friends with whom I collaborate and who support me in the clinical trials that I am doing. Without their support, I would never have been able to achieve what we have achieved in the last couple of years. In fact, in a more and more individualized world, where people often oppose each other, we scientists can show the value of collaboration, because as a team we can achieve so much more than individuals. There are a few people I would like to mention in particular. First of all, my mentor, Dick de Zeeuw. Dick introduced me into nephrology. He convinced me and encouraged me to conduct clinical research, and he guided me and supported me throughout my career. The second person I would like to acknowledge is Vlado Perkovic. Unfortunately, Vlado Perkovic cannot be here, but Vlado showed me and taught me how to conduct and design clinical trials. He showed me the value of involving many other people in research projects. And he gave me the opportunity to visit and to live in a country I would really like to live in. And finally, Glenn Chertow. Glenn, you are in the audience. You are the most talented, polite, and dedicated nephrologist I have ever met and probably will ever meet. You never think about yourself. You always put yourself in second position and give others the opportunity to grow. Be it your patients, be it your colleagues, be it your fellows or trainees. And I would really like to thank you for that. And then finally, as a young investigator, I have a message to other young investigators. Please be involved in research, because as Donald Seldin already said here in this quote that he expressed at the American Society of Clinical Investigation, if investigations is progressively separated from clinical work and teaching, the educational process deteriorates. Only the investigator can teach the methods of critical inquiry acquired in research into the routine practice of medicine. I thank you for your attention.
Hello again. I'm Tamara Isakova, co-chair of Kidney Week 2024. Today's State of the Art will be delivered by Dr. Seker Katharisen on From Reading the Genome for Risk to Rewriting it for Cardiovascular Health. Dr. Katharisen is co-founder and CEO of Verve Therapeutics, a biotechnology company pioneering a new approach to the care of cardiovascular disease, transforming treatment from chronic management to single-course gene editing medicines. He's a cardiologist and scientist who has focused his career on understanding the inherited basis for heart attack and leveraging those insights for the care of cardiovascular disease. Based on his groundbreaking discoveries in human genetic mutations that confer resistance to cardiovascular disease, Dr. Katharisen co-founded Verve Therapeutics with a vision to create a pipeline of single-course gene editing therapies focused on addressing the root causes of this highly prevalent and life-threatening disease. Today, Verve is advancing two initial programs that target PCSK9 and ANGPTL3, genes that have been extensively validated by Dr. Katharisen and others as targets for lowering blood lipids, such as low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, which is a major driver of cardiovascular disease. Prior to joining Verve, Dr. Katharesan's roles included Director of Massachusetts General Center for Genomic Medicine, Director of the Cardiovascular Disease Initiative at the Broad Institute, and Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School. There, his research laboratory focused on understanding the inherited basis for blood lipids and myocardial infarction. For his research contributions, he has been recognized by the American Heart Association with its highest scientific honor, a Distinguished Scientist Award, and by the American Society of Human Genetics with the 2018 Kurt Stern Award. Welcome, Dr. Katharesan.
Thank you very much, Tamara, for the kind introduction. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be here to talk to you about the work we've done on reading the genome for risk to now trying to rewrite it for cardiovascular health. My disclosures. So the problem that I've focused on over the last 25 years or so has been myocardial infarction and more generally atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. As you all know, this is a problem that has a chronic phase as well as an acute phase. Shown on the top left, the chronic phase involves decades of progressive buildup of atherosclerosis in the wall of an artery. And then at an acute time point, there could be plaque disruption, in situ thrombosis, leading to symptoms, EKG change, elevation in cardiac biomarkers, so an acute myocardial infarction. This problem, it remains the leading cause of death worldwide, despite available treatments. Now, a key driver of atherosclerosis are ApoB-containing lipoproteins, schematized here. So lipoproteins like LDL or lipoprotein little a are little spherical balls where the inside is neutral lipid, either cholesterol in orange or triglyceride in blue. And then there's a phospholipid monolayer, and then there's a protein typically embedded on the coat, and the protein is ApoB in the lipoprotein shown here, LDL, lipoprotein little a, or a group of lipoproteins labeled TRLs, collectively called triglyceride-rich lipoproteins. So these lipoproteins have been well established as key drivers of atherosclerosis. So over the last 20, 25 years, we've focused on three problems, and that's what I want to highlight for you, the answers to these questions. What is the genetic basis for higher risk? What's the genetic basis for resistance to myocardial infarction? And can we now rewrite the genome to either treat or prevent atherosclerosis? Shown on the left is the overall population, and then there's DNA sequence. The average patient is at average risk, but some individuals may harbor a single sequence or a collection of letter changes that really put them at risk or confer resistance, or could we rewrite, as I said, the genome to alter risk. So first question, what are the paths to risk? And so here in a couple of slides, we'll summarize the work. There are two major paths to inherited MI risk. And if you take patients who have MI at a young age, let's say men less than 50, women less than 60, they could get there on a genetic basis by either having a single spelling change that really dramatically increases their risk, so-called monogenic model. There could also be a model where there's a cumulative effect of multiple variations in aggregate lead to increased risk, so-called polygenic model. And we've worked on both of these in the context of both of these models in the context of atherosclerosis. And for the monogenic model, it's clear that there are several genes where coding mutations, so mutations in the coding sequence, confer large effects on MI risk. The names of the genes are shown in the first column. The fraction of the population, the carrier frequency, is shown in the second column. The blood lipid level that's elevated as a result of carrying the mutation is shown in the third column. And then lastly, the clinical effect. How much higher risk are you is shown in the last column. And the most important of these monogenic diseases that leads to early myocardial infarction is heterozygous familial hypercholesterolemia, or abbreviated HeFH. This is a serious inherited disease with high cholesterol from birth and heart attack at early ages. And some of the diagnostic criteria, the mutations and the genes and where the mutations lie, the level of cholesterol elevation, the age at a first heart attack, and the prevalence are all shown on this slide. This is actually a fairly common disease as far as genetic diseases go, affecting more than 1 million people in US alone and 3 million in US and Europe combined. Now, in addition to the monogenic model, there's also the polygenic model for early MI risk. And the polygenic model really refers to a quantitative score that one can calculate from your DNA letters. And this single number, the single score, captures the genetic liability to heart attack. And when you graph this score in hundreds of thousands of people, you basically get a bell curve distribution as shown here. Some people are high, some low, most in the middle. And then you can quantitate the risk conferred by having a high score. So this is really a way to capture a single number that captures the genetic liability you might have to a heart attack. And when you look at these two models and ask what are their relative contributions to early heart attack, so you take 100 patients, for example, with MI before the age of 50 in men, age of 60 in women, and ask what fraction of them have a monogenic mutation or a high polygenic score, this is the kind of results that you get. The monogenic model accounts for roughly a couple of % of people. And then the high polygenic score here identified as greater than the 95th percentile, so the top 5% of the distribution of score, those individuals, there's about 20% of them will have early MI, will be among the patients with early MI. And both of these models confer a similar risk, about a 4-fold increased risk for MI. So these are the broad ways to get to early MI based on DNA sequence. Now, we also pivoted a few years ago to look at resistance. Might there be sequence variations that you carry that, rather than increasing risk for disease, actually protects you from heart attack? And the answer is yes. The first of these identified was in a gene called PCSK9. There are people walking around who are naturally resistant to myocardial infarction and ASCVD, and that's because they have a cholesterol-raising gene that is naturally turned off. And because of that, they have roughly 50 milligram deciliter lower cholesterol lifelong, and they have 50% lower risk for ASCVD. And they're healthy otherwise. So having this gene turned off doesn't seem to cause any other problems. And remarkably, the prevalence here of the resistance mutation, roughly 1 in 50 African Americans in the United States actually carries a mutation in PCSK9 that turns the gene off and leads to lower cholesterol, leads to lifelong protection from cardiovascular disease. So that's how this observation was made. Now, we, a couple of years after that initial observation, found a different gene called ANGPTL3 that had the same property. So people walking around with this gene turned off, they have lifelong low blood LDL cholesterol, but also low triglycerides, healthy, resistant to ASCVD. And this is the index patient here, the index individual that allowed us to make this discovery. This woman, Anna Fuhrer, had an LDL of 37, triglycerides of 19. She had many family members with a similar phenotype. And it turned out that she had both copies of ANGPTL3 turned off. So she was a quote unquote human knockout for this gene, and it led to health. So overall, over the last decade or so, there's been 8 genes total identified that harbor resistance mutations. Those are all shown in the first row. The fraction of people that carry these resistance mutations is in the second row. The third row gives you the cholesterol level that's lowered as a result of carrying the mutation, and then lastly, the degree of protection. And what the key insight from all this work was there are 3 major pathways to resistance. They all involve lowering blood cholesterol lifelong. And there's a quantitative relationship that emerged from this work. That is that for every milligram deciliter lower cholesterol over a lifetime, there was a 1% reduction in risk of coronary artery disease. It's a pretty profound relationship because the average LDL in the US is 130 milligrams deciliter. This relationship suggests that if you could lower the average in the population from 130 to 30, you would wipe out coronary artery disease. Seems too good to be true, but it probably is true. Because we're all born with a cholesterol of about 30. We're probably all meant to live with a cholesterol of about 30, 40. 130 is the average, but it's way too high. So this relationship, again, is pretty profound and is what inspired us to move forward to really try to develop a new medicine that might allow us to profoundly lower LDL lifelong in any given individual. And so to summarize all the research work, what causes ASCVD? A key cause is high cumulative lifelong exposure to blood cholesterol that clogs coronary arteries. Cholesterol is carried in 3 lipoproteins that are shown here. And the solution really might be to keep blood cholesterol as low as possible for as long as possible. Okay, so this was the work that we were doing. I was an academic. I was at Mass General Hospital and Broad Institute and Harvard Medical School. 2016, the American Heart Association comes along and says, we have a competition. We want to give $75 million to a single person. Sounded quite good. And we want your best ideas to cure coronary artery disease. I said, well, that's what I've been working on. I know how to cure coronary artery disease. And so we applied with an idea that is shown here, which is, again, developing a medicine that might mimic the resistance mutations that we and others had discovered. So this was our proposal in 2016. We called it One Shot, One Cure. And I'll read the bottom there. We propose to develop an injectable therapeutic administered once in life that will edit the liver, the genome of the liver, and confer resistance to coronary artery disease. And our proposal was to essentially turn off the PCSK9 gene in the liver to lead to lifelong cholesterol lowering after a single treatment. Okay, so we didn't win. But we moved on. We took about 2 years, 2016 to 2018, got other people excited, specifically Google Ventures, GV, and raised about $60 million to try to execute on this idea. And so in 2018, we started the company, and over the last 6 years, we've been able to make good progress to now first-in-human trials for this approach, and that's what I'll share with you over the next 15 minutes or so. So when we started the company, this was the idea. Can we transform the care of ASCVD from daily pills, intermittent injections, to once and done? So the product concept is shown here. Okay, it's an intravenous infusion, a one-time infusion, and the drug itself is shown in the middle. It's an mRNA encoding a specific editor that would make a single spelling change to turn off a given gene. There's a guide RNA as well that tells the editor where to go in the genome to make the spelling change. Both of those nucleic acids are packaged in a little fat bubble, a lipid nanoparticle, and that's what's delivered intravenously as a one-time infusion to ultimately lead to the one and done. So this is the drug, and the goal again is to turn off a cholesterol-raising gene in the liver and mimic those natural resistance mutations that we saw. Now, we are advancing at Verve a pipeline of in vivo gene editing medicines, all with the same goal: lower cholesterol lifelong after a single treatment. And I'll mostly talk about the first target, PCSK9. We have a couple of products that are targeting that target. The second target is ANGPTL3. The third is lipoprotein(a), and there's a couple more as well, as you can see in the first column on the left. The indications we're going after, it all starts with a genetic form of the disease, heterozygous FH, that genetic disease I mentioned earlier. The technology, the editing technology we're using is shown in the third column. Where we are in the clinic is shown in the next couple of columns. The furthest along program is in phase 1, which I'll show you. And then lastly, a lot of our programs are partnered with Eli Lilly and Company in terms of clinical development. Okay, let me walk you through the PCSK9 program. Again, the concept here, because human genetics has taught us that this gene can be turned off in the liver to lead to lifelong LDL lowering, and without any apparent deleterious effects, this is a very good target to turn off in the liver. There's also pharmacologic validation for this target. I think many of you know there's other modalities. There's a monoclonal antibody. There's an siRNA that's been developed against PCSK9. Both of those have been delivered to hundreds of thousands of patients, if not millions of patients, and are very effective and safe. So there's genetic validation for the target. There's pharmacologic validation for the target. It's a liver target. You turn off the gene in the liver, LDL goes down. Now, we have two products that we're developing simultaneously against PCSK9, one called VERVE-101 on the left, VERVE-102 on the right. They basically share the same cargo, the inner contents, which is the editor and the guide. And how they differ is that lipid nanoparticle delivery vehicle, that lipid ball, the shell that carries the editor and the guide to the liver. And this is because we knew that delivery was a key risk for as you develop these kind of products, these kind of first-in-class medicine. And so the two products differ in the delivery system. Now let me walk you through kind of how this all works, or should work. So you infuse the lipid nanoparticle, it's a couple of hours of infusion, into the bloodstream. What happens once inside the bloodstream is the little lipid balls are actually actively taken up by hepatocytes into liver cells, into the liver, into the cell. And once inside the cell, the mRNA for the editor and the guide RNA are released into the cytoplasm. And what happens next is that the mRNA is translated to protein, labeled here ABE, short for adenine base editor. That protein binds to the guide RNA. That complex of the guide RNA and the protein make their way to the nucleus, and there's a scanning of the genome, chromosome by chromosome, until there's a match to the 20 letters that we provided in the guide. And for us, the 20 letters match to the PCSK9 sequence at the end of exon 1 going into intron 1 at a canonical splice site. So what this complex of the editor and the guide do is sit at that one spot in the PCSK9 gene sequence, and then there's a single spelling change made, an A to a G at one spot in the genome. And to think like a pencil and eraser, that's what's literally happening in the cell. And once that single spelling change is made, the gene is turned off, PCSK9 protein is no longer made by that cell, the blood PCSK9 protein level goes down dramatically. So pretty remarkable. This was invented in 2016-17 by somebody named David Liu, the adenine base editor at the Broad Institute and Harvard. And when we got a hold of this technology early 2016-17, it was all kind of concept. And what we were able to do over the first 4 years of the company was get it to work. We got it to work in cells, in mice, and then ultimately in non-human primates. This was a published paper in 2021 with the non-human primate data, where a single infusion of this drug into non-human primates led to about 60 to 70% LDL lowering. So on the y-axis here is the percentage reduction in LDL. On the x-axis is time. And time here is almost 3 years after the initial infusion. And what you can see in purple, which is the highest dose group, we got about a 60 to 70% LDL lowering after the one-time infusion. And 3 years later, the LDL is still down roughly 60 to 70% in these animals, suggesting this concept can work. These are non-human primates, monkeys. So with this information and a couple of additional pieces of data, actually quite a bit more data, we were able to take it to patients, and I'll tell you that in a couple of minutes. The additional data, the additional questions that might be coming to your mind are, well, you're infusing this drug into the bloodstream. Where else is it going beyond the liver? It's very avidly taken up by liver cells. Is it going anywhere else? So you can measure that. Here it's measured in non-human primates that have been sacrificed. You can take a range of tissues on the x-axis. On the y-axis is biodistribution measured by the level of editing, that single spelling change that I mentioned. Where is that being made, in which tissues? And you can see here the different bars are just different doses, and there's a vehicle control as well. Almost all of the editing is happening in the liver, the first tissue that's shown. And then there's a little bit of uptake into a couple of other organs, adrenals and spleen, but pretty much nowhere else. So this is a very liver-specific therapy. Now, another question that might be coming to your mind is, well, you're telling me that you're able to make a single spelling change in the liver, but are you making any other changes, any other parts of the genome, any other letters, so-called off-target editing? So this is an analysis done for off-target editing. On the x-axis is all the chromosomes, on the y-axis is the level of editing at any given spot. And this is looking at about 6,000 different spots across the genome in liver cells from a human being, so primary human hepatocytes, in a dish that have been treated with drug. And what you can see is the purple dot, which is the specific site in the PCSK9 gene that we're looking to make the change. You get very high level editing. But really nowhere else are you getting any editing. That's all the other green dots are at 0. So a very specific therapy, specific to that single base, and that's a function of the editor and the guide together. Okay, so with all these data, we were able to take this product to a first-in-human study. This started in July 2022, and we treated 13 patients with VERVE-101 across several dose levels. And these are all patients with that genetic disease of heterozygous FH, where they have sky-high cholesterol from birth and often have premature coronary disease. Now, this is efficacy. We actually saw dose-dependent reductions in blood PCSK9 protein as well as blood LDL, and similar to what you might expect based on the non-human primate data I showed you. And we were able to see pretty high-level PCSK9 reduction, over 60% in the 2 higher dose cohorts, and we saw very good LDL reduction as well. In one dose level, roughly 42%, and the second dose level closer to 60%, 57%. So very good efficacy, but we also had some challenges. So on the safety side, we saw laboratory abnormalities with the acute infusion of the lipid nanoparticle. Now, these laboratory abnormalities were liver function test elevation, as well as in one patient, a platelet drop. The lab abnormalities were transient. They were reversible after the LNP infusion, but we wanted to better understand what was going on here and why we saw this. And so we paused enrollment in this Heart-1 trial and to better understand what was going on. And I'll get to what we think is going on in a second. This is now the durability data in those patients. On the x-axis is time, on the y-axis is LDL, 2 dose levels, 0.45 mg per kg and 0.6 mg per kg. And what you can see is after the one-time infusion, like you saw in the non-human primates, you're seeing durability out in the longest treated patient with a therapeutic dose, 18 months. That's the purple line. Now, the liver does regenerate in all of us, and roughly every 6 months, you're having a whole turnover of liver cells. The fact that this patient has stable reduction over 18 months, 3 turnovers of livers, suggests that this is likely to be very durable, maybe even a one and done in patients. Okay, so what do we think is going on in terms of those acute lab abnormalities? So there are 3 components to the drug, as I said. There's the guide RNA, there's the mRNA, there's a lipid nanoparticle. And in studies that we've done over the last 6 months, it really have been able to isolate the lab abnormalities to the lipid nanoparticle as the cause. The ABE, the editor and the guide, seem to be working as designed, and the LNP, we believe, is the cause of the laboratory abnormalities. And as I mentioned earlier, we have the second product, VERVE-102, that actually uses a different lipid nanoparticle delivery system. And components of this delivery system have already been tested in over 100 patients by another company, and it's well tolerated. And for this lipid nanoparticle, we've actually added an innovation, a targeting ligand called GalNAc. It's a liver targeting ligand that should actually improve the safety profile as well. And so VERVE-102 is designed to enter hepatocytes through either the LDL receptor or the receptor for this GalNAc targeting ligand called ASGPR. So this is the product now that's in clinic. We started dosing patients earlier this year. and we're guiding to clinical data for VERVE-102 in the first half of 2025. Now, we believe that VERVE-102 will retain the efficacy and durability that we saw with 101 because it's the same editor, the same guide, but we'll avoid the laboratory abnormalities because we've changed out the LNP delivery system. So our current focus right now is on executing on the phase 1 study for 102 and having clinical data for this product in the first half of next year. So where is all this headed? Once and done gene editing medicines to treat cardiovascular disease. So here's a potential development path for VERVE-102. Right now, we're focused on patients with heterozygous FH and premature coronary artery disease in a phase 1. This might move to a phase 2 where we're treating patients with all patients with HeFH, and potentially also to a phase 3 with an LDL endpoint. And that's really on the genetic disease. And if everything works out there, you may imagine expanding this to patients, a broader set of patients with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease who need durable LDL lowering for a long time. Now, one question that comes to mind, one other question that comes to mind is, will patients actually be open to this kind of approach given that there are other alternatives to lower cholesterol? So this question has been addressed in a couple of different surveys, and here's one example of a couple of thousand patients who have ASCVD or high cholesterol who all needed lifelong LDL lowering, and they were asked, you have 4 options: once daily pill, one-time gene editing treatment, twice annual injections at the doctor's office, so something like inclisiran, or twice monthly injections at home, something like a monoclonal antibody, Praluent or Repatha. And you can see the patient preferences. About 46% said they'd prefer a daily pill. A full third already said they'd prefer a one and done if it was available. And then 14% said twice a year, and 4% said twice a month. So there's openness. Of course, the key is the data to generate the efficacy and safety data over time, but there is openness. So the current care model for chronic disease looks like this. X-axis is time, on the Y-axis is LDL. Patient has an MI, they get put on a couple of medicines, their LDL comes down, but we all know that it typically doesn't stay down. About 50% of patients after starting a cardiovascular medication are no longer on them after just 6 months. Just 6 months later, half the patients are no longer on the medication that you started for them. And it gets only worse from there. That lack of adherence, the lack of continuity of care leads to poor control of LDL over time and cholesterol years. Lowering that is really the key for this disease, keeping the cumulative exposure as low as possible. So what we'd like to do is change, hopefully, the paradigm of care from chronic care to a one-time treatment, lifelong cholesterol lowering. And it does look like it's going to be possible because this is that patient that I showed you earlier. We're still, of course, a few years away from gathering the data necessary from moving to phase 2, phase 3, but this looks like it will be an important option for patients down the road. So thank you for your attention, and this is our team.
All right, thank you, Dr. Katharison, for sharing your groundbreaking research. This plenary session has concluded. Please make your way to the exhibits and posters. Thank you very much.